Even at 4:30 in the morning, the polished floors reflected the glow of thousands of lights. Luggage wheels echoed through endless corridors, and departure boards flickered with flights bound for cities scattered across the world. While most travelers hurried past without looking twice, Daniel Carter noticed everything. At 29 years old, Daniel worked the overnight shift as a janitor at one of America's busiest international airports. Every night, he swept the terminals, emptied trash bins, polished waiting areas, and quietly cleaned up after people who would never know his name. He didn't complain. His father had taught him that every honest job deserved respect. As Daniel pushed his cleaning cart toward Gate 24, he noticed something lying beneath a row of leather airport seats. At first, he assumed it was another abandoned phone charger. Then the overhead lights caught the edge of polished black leather, a wallet. He bent down and picked it up. The leather was soft, expensive, and surprisingly heavy. "Someone's going to have a terrible morning," Daniel muttered with a small smile. Airport policy was simple. Any valuable item had to be taken immediately to lost and found. He turned to continue walking. Then curiosity got the better of him. He opened the wallet just enough to find an identification card. The moment he saw the name, his footsteps stopped. Robert Harrison. Daniel's breathing slowed. That name wasn't unfamiliar. It couldn't be. He looked again. There was no mistake. Robert Harrison, President and Chief Executive Officer of Harrison Air Group, one of the largest airline companies in the country. Daniel suddenly felt as though the noisy airport had gone silent. That name had haunted his family for nearly 20 years. Daniel was only 10 years old when everything changed. His father, Michael Carter, had worked as a senior maintenance supervisor for Harrison Air. He loved airplanes. He loved the people he worked with. Most of all, he loved providing for his family. Daniel still remembered sitting on the front porch every Friday evening, waiting for his father's old blue pickup truck to pull into the driveway. Michael always stepped out smiling. Sometimes he brought home tiny toy airplanes from the airport gift shop. Sometimes he simply wrapped Daniel in a hug and asked about school. Life wasn't luxurious, but it was happy. Then one afternoon, Michael came home hours earlier than usual. His shoulders sagged. His work badge was gone. He carried a cardboard box containing only a framed family photo, a coffee mug, and 2 notebooks. Daniel's mother immediately knew something was wrong. "What happened?" Michael stared at the floor. "They said company funds disappeared." She frowned. "But you had nothing to do with it." "I know. Then why would they fire you?" Michael's voice cracked. They needed someone to blame. Daniel remembered watching from the hallway as his father quietly cried for the first time in his life. The company never proved he stole anything, but they fired him anyway. Every future employer saw the dismissal. No one wanted to hire a man accused of dishonesty. Within a year, the family lost their home. Michael worked odd jobs whenever he could. Construction, warehouse loading, night security, anything that helped keep food on the table. Yet despite everything, he never became bitter. Every night before Daniel went to bed, Michael repeated the same words. "Son, never let another person's wrongdoing steal your honesty." Those words stayed with Daniel long after his father passed away. Back in the airport terminal, Daniel slowly closed the wallet. Inside was enough cash to pay nearly 6 months of his rent, several platinum credit cards, a passport, business documents. There was also a folded family photograph. Robert Harrison stood smiling beside a teenage girl and an older woman. For a brief second, anger rose inside Daniel. This man's company had destroyed his father's career, destroyed their family, destroyed their future. Now fate had placed something priceless into his hands. No cameras seemed to be pointed in his direction. No one appeared to be looking. He could simply leave the wallet where it was. Someone else would find it. Or maybe no one ever would. Daniel tightened his grip. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "Never let another person's wrongdoing steal your honesty." He closed his eyes. Then he sighed. "No," he whispered. "I'm not becoming someone my father wouldn't recognize." He placed the wallet safely inside a sealed evidence pouch from his janitor's cart and headed toward airport security. As he rounded the corner, a sharply dressed woman hurried toward him. "Excuse me," she called. Daniel stopped. She looked anxious. "Have you happened to find a black wallet?" Daniel studied her face. "I did." Relief flooded across her expression. "Oh, thank goodness. Mr. Harrison is about to board a flight to Chicago. We've searched everywhere." Daniel blinked. "So, he's still here?" "For now." She extended her hand. "I'll take it." Daniel hesitated. Airport policy required him to verify ownership directly or hand the wallet over through official channels. "I'm sorry," he said politely, "but I'll need Mr. Harrison to identify it himself." The woman frowned. "Do you know who he is?" "I do." "Then surely you understand he's extremely busy." Daniel nodded calmly. "And rules apply to everyone." She stared at him for a moment, before reluctantly saying, "Fine." She turned and hurried away. Daniel had no idea that within the next hour, he would come face to face with the man whose decision had changed his family's life forever. Nor did he know that returning one lost wallet would uncover a secret buried for almost 2 decades. A secret powerful enough to change both of their lives, for Daniel stood outside the airport security office with the sealed evidence pouch resting in his hands. Passengers streamed past him, dragging suitcases and checking boarding passes, unaware that the simple wallet he carried held the weight of nearly 20 years of unanswered questions. A radio clipped to a security officer's vest crackled. "Mr. Harrison is on his way." Daniel's heartbeat quickened. For years, he'd imagined what he would say if he ever met the man whose name had become a shadow over his family's life. He had pictured anger, confrontation, even accusations. But now that the moment had arrived, all he felt was uncertainty. A few seconds later, several people rounded the corner. 2 airport security officers walked ahead, followed by a woman in a Navy business suit, the same assistant Daniel had spoken to earlier. Behind them came a tall, silver-haired man in his early 60s. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, but there was nothing flashy about him. His expression was composed, almost tired, as though carrying responsibilities no one else could see. Robert Harrison. He looked nothing like the villain Daniel had imagined growing up. Robert approached with calm confidence. "I understand you found my wallet." "I did, sir." Daniel handed the sealed pouch to the security supervisor instead of directly to Robert. The supervisor broke the seal and placed the wallet on the desk. "Can you identify its contents?" Robert nodded. "There should be my passport, 4 credit cards, some cash, and—" He paused. "A photograph of my wife and daughter." The supervisor opened the wallet. Everything was exactly where Robert said it would be. "It belongs to him." The wallet was returned. Robert let out a slow breath of relief. "You've saved me from what would have been a very long day." He turned toward Daniel. "Thank you." Daniel simply nodded. "You didn't have to do the right thing," Robert continued. "Many people wouldn't have." Daniel almost laughed. "If only you knew." Robert reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a checkbook. "I'd like to reward you." He began writing. Daniel noticed the amount before the check was fully finished. $10,000. For someone working the overnight cleaning shift, it was life-changing money. Robert signed the check and held it out. "Please." Daniel looked at it. Then he slowly shook his head. "I can't accept it." Robert frowned. "Why not?" "Because returning something that belongs to someone else isn't a service. It's the right thing." For the first time, Robert looked genuinely surprised. "You realize most people wouldn't refuse this." Daniel smiled politely. "My father taught me that honesty loses its value the moment it has a price." The words hit Robert harder than Daniel expected. For a brief second, something flickered across the older man's face. Recognition. Not of Daniel, but of the sentence itself. "That's an unusual thing to say," Robert murmured. Daniel didn't answer. Robert folded the check back into his pocket. "Then at least allow me to thank you properly." He extended his hand. Daniel hesitated before shaking it. It lasted only a second, yet something about the young man's face lingered in Robert's mind. As Robert turned to leave, the family photograph slipped from the wallet and drifted onto the polished floor. Neither man noticed. Daniel bent down and picked it up. Before he could call out, he saw something written on the back in faded blue ink. Lake Harmony, Summer 2007. Beneath it, in smaller handwriting, "Never forget the people who helped us get here." Daniel stared at the words. For a billionaire CEO, it seemed strangely humble. He hurried after Robert. "Sir," Robert turned. "You dropped this." He accepted the photograph carefully, almost reverently. A faint smile crossed his face. "My daughter wrote that. You keep it in your wallet? Every day?" Robert looked at the picture for a moment before slipping it safely back inside. "It reminds me that success can disappear faster than it arrives." Daniel watched him walk away. For the first time in his life, the image he'd carried of Robert Harrison began to crack. Could this really be the same man who had destroyed his father's life? 20 minutes later, Daniel returned to his cleaning duties. The airport was beginning to wake up. Morning flights filled the terminal with hurried conversations and rolling luggage. As he emptied a trash bin near Gate 18, his phone buzzed. It was his mother. "Morning, Mom. You sound tired. Long night." She laughed softly. "You work too hard." Daniel smiled. "Someone has to keep the airport clean." There was a brief silence. Then she asked, "Did you remember what today is?" Daniel stopped pushing his cleaning cart. Of course. How could he forget? It was the anniversary of his father's death. 10 years. Not a single day had passed without Daniel wishing his father could see that he had grown into the man he always hoped to become. "I remembered," Daniel said quietly. "I'm stopping by the cemetery after work." His mother hesitated. "Daniel, yes? I found another box in the attic." "What kind of box?" "Your father's." Daniel's grip tightened on the phone. "There are old notebooks, letters, and some company papers from Harrison Air." His heart skipped. "I've never seen these before. Can you come by after work?" "I will." As they ended the call, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Across the airport, Robert Harrison sat alone in the airline's executive lounge, preparing for his flight to Chicago. He opened his wallet to return the family photograph. Instead, another folded piece of paper slipped out. He frowned. He had never seen it before. It was yellowed with age, as though it had been hidden inside the wallet for years. Slowly, he unfolded it. His expression changed. The paper contained only one sentence. Typed. Unsigned. Michael Carter was innocent. Robert stared at the words. His pulse quickened. The name struck him like a bolt of lightning. Michael Carter. The maintenance supervisor dismissed nearly 20 years ago. The man everyone had believed stole company funds. Robert whispered to himself, "Who put this here?" For the first time in decades, a case he thought had been closed came rushing back into his memory, and somewhere deep inside, a question began to grow. The morning sun was already climbing when Daniel's shift finally ended. His body was exhausted, but his mind refused to rest. The words his mother had spoken over the phone echoed again and again. "I found another box in the attic." For years, they had believed there was nothing left of Michael Carter's old work life except a few photographs and a weathered employee badge tucked away in a drawer. If there were more documents, why had they never found them? Daniel drove across town to the modest brick house where he had grown up. The white paint on the front porch railing had begun to peel, and the flower beds his father once cared for now held more weeds than roses. His mother opened the front door before he could knock. She smiled warmly, but Daniel noticed the sadness in her eyes. "You look just like your father when you're thinking too hard," she said. Daniel laughed softly. "I've heard that before." She led him to the dining room, where an old cardboard box rested on the table. The edges were worn, and dust still clung to the lid. "I found it behind some insulation while cleaning the attic," she explained. "I don't remember seeing it." Daniel carefully lifted the lid. Inside were neatly stacked notebooks, faded envelopes tied together with string, maintenance reports, and a small leather journal. On top lay a folded letter addressed simply, "To my family." Daniel unfolded it with trembling hands. His father's familiar handwriting filled the page. "If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer here." Daniel swallowed hard. "I need you to know something. I've never stopped believing. I did not steal from Harrison Air." A tear rolled down his mother's cheek. Daniel continued reading. "Many people told me to sue the company. Others told me to seek revenge. I chose neither. Bitterness can become a prison if you let it." His father's words felt as though they had been written yesterday. "If the truth ever comes to light, let it restore your peace, not your anger." Daniel lowered the letter. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, his mother whispered, "That sounds exactly like him." Daniel nodded. "It does." He reached deeper into the box and found the leather journal. The first pages described routine maintenance schedules and inspections. Then, halfway through, one entry caught his attention. October 14, found another discrepancy in maintenance purchasing records. Reported it to Mr. Collins. He seemed unusually nervous. Daniel frowned. He turned the page. Another entry. October 17, large payments approved for equipment that never arrived. I have copies of the invoices. His heartbeat quickened. One final entry, written only days before Michael lost his job, made him freeze. If anything happens to me, someone inside management already knows where the missing money really went. Daniel looked up. Mom? She read the page over his shoulder. I've never seen these. Neither had he. If his father had documented everything, why had no one ever investigated? Across the city, Robert Harrison sat alone in his executive office overlooking the airport. The anonymous note was still lying on his desk. Michael Carter was innocent. He had canceled his afternoon meetings. Something about the note refused to leave his mind. He pressed the intercom. Linda, could you come in for a moment? His longtime executive assistant entered. You wanted to see me? Do we still have archived personnel files from 20 years ago? She looked surprised. They're stored off-site, but yes. I need Michael Carter's file. She hesitated. May I ask why? Robert looked toward the window. Because I'm beginning to wonder if we made a terrible mistake. Late that afternoon, 2 thick archive boxes arrived. Dust covered their lids. Robert opened the first. Performance reviews. Maintenance reports. Employee commendations. Every evaluation described Michael Carter the same way. Reliable, honest, respected. One report even called him the employee most trusted by the maintenance department. Robert frowned. That didn't match the man he remembered being dismissed for theft. Then he reached the termination file. Inside was a single summary. No witness statements. No financial audit. No signed confession. Only a recommendation from one executive. Richard Collins, Chief Financial Officer. Robert stared at the signature. Richard Collins had retired comfortably 15 years earlier. Back then, Robert had been a newly appointed executive, juggling rapid company expansion and relying heavily on senior leadership. He had trusted Collins without question. Now that trust felt unsettling. Robert picked up the phone. Linda. Yes, Mr. Harrison. I need everything we still have on Richard Collins. Everything? Financial records, internal audits, retirement documents. There was a pause. Of course. After hanging up, Robert leaned back in his chair. For the first time in nearly 20 years, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had failed a man he had never truly known. That evening, Daniel sat alone on the front porch with his father's journal. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, he quietly whispered, I wish you were here to tell me what really happened. A gentle breeze turned one of the journal's pages by itself. Tucked between the paper was something he hadn't noticed before. A small key. Attached to it was a faded tag. Written in his father's handwriting were just 4 words. Locker 214. Airport Terminal B. Daniel stared at the key. Terminal B. The very airport where he now worked. Whatever his father had hidden there had remained untouched for almost 20 years. He closed his hand around the key. Tomorrow, before starting his shift, he was going to find Locker 214. He had no idea what waited inside. But for the first time since his father's death, Daniel believed the truth was no longer buried. It was waiting to be found. Daniel barely slept that night. The small brass key rested on his bedside table, catching the first rays of morning sunlight. For nearly 20 years, it had remained hidden inside his father's journal, waiting for someone to find it. Only one question echoed through Daniel's mind. What had his father hidden? He arrived at the airport almost an hour before his shift began. The terminal was quieter than usual. Travelers sipped coffee while checking departure screens, and the distant rumble of rolling suitcases echoed through the long corridor. Daniel walked toward the older section of Terminal B. Years earlier, before the airport underwent major renovations, rows of rental lockers had lined one wall. Most had been removed, replaced by modern storage facilities, but a handful still remained. Their faded blue paint and scratched metal doors looked like forgotten relics from another era. Daniel searched each number carefully. 208, 209, 210. His heart beat faster. 212, 213. Finally, 214. He slipped the key into the lock. For a moment, it refused to turn. He tried again. This time, there was a soft click. Daniel slowly pulled the door open. Inside sat a weathered brown briefcase covered in dust. Nothing more. He lifted it out carefully. The combination lock had never been engaged. When he opened it, a familiar scent of old paper and leather drifted into the air. Inside were neatly organized folders, sealed envelopes, maintenance reports, and a small cassette recorder. Resting on top was another handwritten note. Daniel unfolded it. If you are reading this, then the truth has finally found its way back to you. I kept these records because I feared they would disappear if I handed them to the wrong person. I believed that one day someone honest would finish what I could not. If that day has come, promise me one thing. Let justice guide you, not revenge. Love always, Dad. Daniel closed his eyes. For a long moment, he simply held the letter against his chest. Even after all these years, his father was still teaching him how to live. He carefully opened the first folder. Inside were copies of maintenance invoices, purchase orders, payment approvals, and handwritten notes. Several invoices listed expensive aircraft equipment that had supposedly been delivered. Beside each one, Michael had written the same observation in red ink. Delivery never received. Daniel frowned. Another folder contained copies of internal memos. Many bore the signature of Richard Collins, the same executive whose name Robert Harrison had discovered in the archived personnel file. Then Daniel found something unexpected. A sealed envelope labeled, "Only if the truth is ever questioned." Inside was a small USB flash drive. Daniel stared at it. His father had always embraced new technology whenever it could help him do his job. Before he died, he had copied important documents from paper onto digital storage whenever possible. If the drive still worked after all these years, it might contain everything his father had tried to preserve. Across the city, Robert Harrison sat in a conference room, with Linda and the airline's chief legal officer. Stacks of old records covered the polished table. Linda looked uneasy. "We found something." Robert looked up. "What is it?" She slid a thin file across the table. "It concerns Richard Collins." Robert opened it. Inside was an internal audit completed 6 months after Collins retired. The report described accounting irregularities involving several maintenance contracts from nearly 20 years earlier. The investigation had quietly ended after auditors concluded there wasn't enough remaining evidence to pursue criminal charges. Robert's jaw tightened. Why was I never shown this? The legal officer answered carefully. At the time, the board believed reopening old allegations would damage the company's reputation. Robert looked around the room in disbelief. So protecting the company became more important than finding the truth? No one answered. The silence said enough. Robert slowly closed the file. If Michael Carter was innocent, he couldn't finish the sentence. The weight of what that meant settled heavily over the room. That evening, Daniel visited an old family friend. Samuel Brooks had worked alongside Michael Carter for nearly 15 years before retiring. Now in his late 70s, Samuel still lived in the same modest house where Daniel remembered attending summer barbecues as a child. Samuel welcomed him warmly. "You've got your father's eyes," Daniel smiled. "I wish I had more of his patience." After a cup of coffee, Daniel placed the briefcase on the kitchen table. Samuel's smile faded. "I haven't seen that case in 20 years. You recognize it?" Samuel nodded slowly. "Your father carried it everywhere during those last few weeks." Daniel opened it and spread out the documents. Samuel adjusted his glasses. Then his face turned pale. "I remember these invoices." "You do?" Michael wasn't investigating missing money. Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" Samuel looked directly into his eyes. "He was investigating missing airplane parts." Daniel froze. Samuel continued. "Someone approved payments for equipment that was never delivered. Maintenance crews had to repair older aircraft using temporary replacements because the new parts never arrived." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. "So the missing money was only part of it," Samuel finished. "If those records are accurate, people were putting passenger safety at risk." The room fell silent. This had never been about simple theft. It had been about protecting a fraud that could have endangered countless lives. Samuel leaned back in his chair. "I begged your father to walk away. What did he say?" Samuel smiled sadly. "He told me, if honest people stay quiet because they're afraid, dishonest people will always win." Daniel lowered his head. Those words sounded exactly like the man he remembered. The next morning, Robert Harrison's office phone rang. "Mr. Harrison?" "Yes. It's airport security." Robert recognized the supervisor's voice. "We've received a request from one of your employees." "What kind of request?" "He wants permission to review archived surveillance records from 20 years ago." Robert frowned. "Who requested them?" The supervisor checked the paperwork. "A janitor." There was a brief pause. Then he read the name. Daniel Carter. Robert slowly stood. The name struck him instantly. The honest young man who had returned his wallet. Michael Carter's son. Robert looked out the window toward the busy airport below. 2 decades had separated their lives. Now, without planning it, they were searching for the same truth, and neither of them realized that someone else had just learned they were getting dangerously close. For the next 3 days, Daniel hardly left the airport. Whenever he wasn't cleaning terminals or emptying trash bins, he was carefully reviewing every document from his father's briefcase. The USB drive held scanned invoices, emails, maintenance reports, and audio recordings Michael had made after work. One recording stood out above the others. Michael's calm voice filled Daniel's headphones. "If anyone ever hears this, it means I wasn't able to finish what I started. I don't know who I can trust anymore. Richard Collins knows these aircraft parts never arrived, but the payments were approved anyway. I've reported the discrepancies several times. If something happens to me, don't seek revenge. Seek the truth." Daniel removed the headphones slowly. His father had documented everything, not because he expected recognition, but because he believed the truth mattered. Across town, Robert Harrison had reached the same conclusion through a different path. Independent forensic accountants had reviewed the archived financial records. Their findings matched Michael's notes almost perfectly. Millions of dollars had been diverted through fake maintenance contracts over several years. Richard Collins had authorized many of the payments. The evidence also showed something Robert had never imagined. Michael Carter hadn't been fired because investigators proved he was guilty. He had been dismissed because Collins convinced senior executives that Michael was becoming a disruptive employee after asking too many questions. Robert leaned back in his chair, overwhelmed. For 20 years, an innocent man's reputation had been destroyed because leadership, including himself, had failed to ask one more question. He quietly whispered, "I'm so sorry, Michael." The following afternoon, Daniel received an unexpected call. "Mr. Carter?" "Speaking. This is Linda Evans from Harrison Air Group. Mr. Harrison would like to meet with you." Daniel closed his eyes. He knew this moment would come. "I'll be there." Robert chose not to meet in the executive boardroom. Instead, he reserved a quiet conference room overlooking the runway. As Daniel entered, Robert stood immediately. No assistants, no lawyers, no cameras, just two men carrying the weight of the same past. For several seconds, neither spoke. Finally, Robert broke the silence. "I owe you more than an apology." Daniel remained standing. "My father spent the rest of his life trying to clear his name. I know. He died believing no one would ever listen." Robert lowered his eyes. "I failed him." Daniel studied the older man carefully. For years, he had imagined this meeting. He thought it would fill him with anger. Instead, he saw genuine regret. Robert slid a folder across the table. "Completed an independent investigation." Daniel opened it. The first page read, "Official findings. Michael Carter was wrongfully dismissed. No evidence supports any allegation of theft or misconduct." Daniel stopped reading. His vision blurred. For 20 years, those words had never been spoken. Now they existed in black and white. Robert continued quietly. "The company will publicly clear your father's name." He pushed another document forward. "We're also establishing the Michael Carter Integrity Award. Every year it will recognize an employee who demonstrates exceptional honesty and courage." Daniel looked down at the page, his father's name, printed with honor instead of suspicion. He smiled through tears. He would have liked that. "I hope so." A week later, Harrison Air Group held a press conference inside the airport's main terminal. Employees, reporters, and travelers gathered as Robert stepped to the podium. Behind him stood a large photograph of Michael Carter in his maintenance uniform. Robert spoke without reading prepared notes. "Today, I stand before you not only as the CEO of this company, but as someone accepting responsibility for a failure of leadership." The room grew silent. 20 years ago, Michael Carter lost his career because we failed to investigate the truth thoroughly. Our systems failed him. Our leadership failed him. And I failed him. Cameras clicked rapidly. Robert continued. "Integrity deserves protection, not punishment." He announced that Michael's personnel record had been fully corrected. The Carter family would receive compensation, and Harrison Air would introduce new whistleblower protections so employees could report concerns without fear of retaliation. The applause that followed was not for the company. It was for a man whose honesty had finally been recognized. After the ceremony, Robert found Daniel standing alone near the observation windows, watching aircraft lift into the afternoon sky. "I have one more thing to ask," Robert said. Daniel turned. "I'd like you to join Harrison Air." Daniel smiled politely. "I'm already employed by Harrison Air." Robert laughed softly. You're right. Then his expression became serious. I don't want you cleaning the floors anymore. Daniel waited. I want you to help us build a stronger culture. Someone who reminds every employee that honesty isn't just a policy. It's a responsibility. Daniel looked through the glass as another aircraft climbed into the bright blue sky. His father had loved airplanes. Perhaps this was a different way of continuing the work he had started. I'll accept, Daniel said. But on one condition. Robert smiled. Name it. The janitors, mechanics, baggage handlers, and cleaners deserve the same respect as executives. Robert extended his hand. You have my word. This time, Daniel shook it without hesitation. Months later, a small bronze plaque was installed near the entrance to the maintenance department. Thousands of employees walked past it every year. It read, "In memory of Michael Carter who chose integrity, even when it cost him everything. The truth may be delayed, but it is never defeated." Daniel often paused there before beginning work, not because the pain had disappeared, but because peace had finally replaced it. As another aircraft disappeared into the clouds, he remembered his father's favorite words, "Never let another person's wrongdoing steal your honesty." For years, Daniel thought those words were simply advice. Now he understood they were a legacy. A lost wallet had found its owner, but far more importantly, the truth had finally found its way home.